today's a very special day because we've got a co-founder of Match. I'm interviewing Simon Glinsky. Simon Glinsky was at McKinsey in a former life prior to Match, and then he started at Match in 1993. And he is the person who wrote the business plan. Originally, the very first business plan is came from Simon. He started also facilitating at Stanford University in interpersonal dynamics at that time, in actually 1991. And he's still doing this 34 years later, still teaching and facilitating at Stanford University. Simon's joining us now. Jolly good. And so at Match, he helped with startup leadership and branding and marketing, hiring, and he also supported the original fundraiser. But most importantly, he wrote the original business plan. So Simon, how did it all start? And who were the original team?
The original team was Gary Kremen. He's the primary founder. Peng Ong was the technical founder, and myself, who I was focused on the business and the relationship arenas. Gary and I went to business school together at Stanford, and Gary and I had a good time together, and he got to know me as someone who has a good combination of both the business and the interpersonal piece. And you mentioned I occasionally teach as an advanced facilitator at Stanford, and it's the interpersonal dynamics that I teach even today occasionally with the MBA students. And Gary and I were friends and would commiserate about our adventures dating and our desire to find a long-term partner. In fact, after school ended, we both bucked each other up when we would take ads out to try to meet people. In those days, one would take ads out in the newspaper, classifieds in print, and these were very tiny classifieds. There could be thousands of them on several pages in somewhat random order, and you just had to peer through all those and pick a few that you wanted to respond to. Originally, one would send in a numbered postcard to a box or code. Later, the newspaper set up phone services that you paid a fee each time you called, and you could leave the person a voicemail. And you tried to connect that way and have to wait and see if that person wanted to call you back. But no pictures. And also the search was difficult since the classifieds were in random order. Gary hit on a good idea one time before we founded Match. We decided to take an ad out to double date. And we were looking for an opposite pair. I'm a gay guy, and Gary wanted to date a woman. So we were looking for a friendship pair, a straight or straightish woman and a gay guy. And we thought, well, first of all, that's like a good screener. People who are friendly and enjoy that together, they're probably nice to be with. Second, it would take the edge off of a double date because it'd be friendly and we'd all be together. We'd all already have a friend there as an anchor. And then finally, it was good marketing. It certainly made our ad different and noticeable. And we did end up going on 4 or 5 dates that way. Gary met someone, I think they did date for a while that way, and it was a lot of fun. But out of those experiences with the ads is where Gary actually came up with the idea. We both had some experience already on the internet, even though it was very early. This would have been in the early 90s, and most people weren't on the internet. Some people were on closed networks like AOL or Prodigy, but Gary and I were aware of browser option like Mosaic, and I also got my first email address actually in the 80s. So we were both aware of that, and it's Gary who called attention to it. Said, if we did this on the internet, can't we make this work better? You can see pictures, you can search, you can match, and Simon, you know about this, how people get together and about relationships. So let's do something. And that was the germination of the idea. There were some mild predecessors. Before that, there were chat rooms on AOL, America Online, where people might meet randomly. Before that, there was computer dating. I actually tried that once some years earlier, where you would
punch card dating.
Yeah, you would fill in a form, and then I got back a dot matrix printout of 30 people that I could read about and decide if I wanted to call them. But really, Match was a whole new level of wanting to provide more information, the photos, and then do some kind of matching and psychographic profiling. So that's what got us started off. And initially we worked a lot by phone, but funnily enough, so that's when the name Match first came up. Was Gary came up with it and brought it up to me in a phone conversation. I thought it was fabulous. And then I worked on the business plan with Gary. And we think that was one of the first, maybe the first printed formal business plan for an internet business, because that was in 1993. And we only counted 1 million or 1 million point something people in the US actually on the internet itself. Everyone
We
else
have
was
one of the
on.
original copies, actually. Sounds like something could be in a museum at this stage.
I do, and there is one in a museum. I believe we sent a copy to the Computer Museum in the San Jose Silicon Valley area.
Excellent.
But remind me in a few minutes when we get to one of the story, and I'll go hunt in my file. I can show that to you.
Great.
But one interesting thing about it that hasn't been written about very much of it all is we actually founded a company called Electric Classifieds Incorporated. I don't know how, looking back, but we had a fabulous run with names, Match and Electric Classifieds. They're both great names. But the idea was very good. It was that Match or personals could be one of several verticals. And once we learned how to do that, we could address other verticals, other things that you had in the classifieds, such as automobiles or jobs or whatever. And it turns out that Match made such a splash that most of the time we focused there. And there were other parts of the initial vision that weren't completely realized. Another was that we could help the newspapers and we could become their online partner and run some of those verticals for them online. I actually went to a conference of alternative newspapers during our formation era, which I would say is 1993 to 95 when we went live. And it was hard to get them interested. They were not forward looking to the internet or technology wise, which is too bad, because had that succeeded, we might have smoothed out the issues that industry has had since then.
If one of the newspapers had bitten and said, yeah, we want to do it, what would that have looked like?
Well, we might have done a partnership or private label operation. So you might have maybe a newspaper branded way of logging in or clicking in, or subscribers might do so, but we will be running the whole operation and there would be some split of revenue and so forth. The newspaper would continue to receive some revenue.
Gotcha.
But as I said, quickly it became clear that Match was really taking off, and that's where we spent most of our time. There's a number of things we did great, and there's a few things that were challenges or possibly lessons learned. So one of them is we were a first mover, and that was really cool, but it was also hard. And there's different ways to tell the story. So one is that later, when Craigslist and eBay came along, eBay was started as an auction site, but has essentially become a kind of classifieds or marketplace. And in a way, they did what was part of our original vision. And it kind of shows the value of quirkiness, because they didn't do it in a logical, rational way. They had quirky sites and methods, and then that just sort of appealed to people and caught fire. As for Match, we did a great job setting up the brand, the whole vision of what the brand would be. That would be focused on relationships, people meeting people. We picked a great name, and so it became a blue chip. It's still a stalwart, even though there are many others. And you know how these brands are, they kind of float up and down in usage. So Match.com itself is not always having the largest usage, but it's definitely been the steadiest, and it's still a stalwart.
Was it always focused on dating, or did you have aspirations towards other forms of introductions and matching?
We focused on dating and Match. We focused on it leading to relationships.
Correct.
And I do remember the first time we learned of a couple getting married who had met on Match, and that propelled us to a short spot on the Today Show, a national program here in the U.S. And that was like one of the big moments of bringing the brand out.
How did you get the
So
first 1,000 members, the very first few 100 members up to 1,000? How did you do any advertising, or what was the seed?
no, there were two or three ways. One was naturally friends or friends of friends and friends of our angel and early investors. But the other was when we went live, it was live internationally. You could log in from anywhere. But as far as the marketing and inviting people, we went city by city
Mhm.
because, if you get 5 users in Poughkeepsie, it's hard for them to find someone to date. So we need to get hundreds or thousands in one city at a time. And we would actually go physically, at least the first many cities. And that was one of my first jobs before we hired a VP of marketing and kind of professionalized the effort further. So, for example, I presented to computer clubs. We went to here in San Francisco and LA, we went to nightclubs with literature freebies. And another thing that might be fun to hear is we offered free electronic photos. And of course, we take this for granted now, but at that time, 95, 96, almost no one could take their own electronic photo. It was a neato thing
How
to get a
did you
free
do it?
electronic photo, be able to upload that, and then you could also use it elsewhere. So we did that at clubs.
And what was the device like for that back in the mid-90s?
It was definitely bigger than what we have now. I think, being the an official type of thing, we had it set up on a tripod with the background. It was a little nicer, than what you normally do. We had two business strategies than the general branding of the relationship orientation. One was to make it safe and attractive for women.
Mhm.
And because for the non-gay market, you don't want to have 10 excited gentlemen and one woman, and then might not feel safe. You get bombarded with all kinds of inquiries and things. So we knew that in the design of it, the graphics, the flow, the choices you make, how you contact people or block them. So it had to be safe for women. And I'd say we did a really good job of that. And our first VP of marketing, Fran Meyer, who's also a Stanford Business School graduate and was a woman, which I think helped uphold that as we got bigger.
Mhm.
And then the second was to offer advertising, or rather memberships and subscribing to all markets, including LGBTQ, which at that time was considered very forward thinking. And the idea was that gay, lesbian folks are sometimes more open to trying new things, particularly then things are better now, but particularly that it might be harder to meet people, and particularly outside of large cities. The options for meeting people don't appeal to everybody. Let's say back then people might go to a smoky bar, and that doesn't appeal to everybody. So we thought correctly that gay and lesbian folks would be more willing to try and meet more people, and then that could create a word of mouth, and that could create a kind of stylish aura and make it cool, which was true. It worked. So some of the clubs we first went to were gay clubs where people were very enthusiastic about. There was pushback from the early venture capitalists about that. They didn't see that as a legitimate market. And to Gary and the company's credit, we held that up and said, no, not only is it an ethical matter that people are the same in this respect, but it's a very good business approach to make this exciting and hope it catch fire, which
What
it
was the
did.
nature of the original questions? How many questions did you have, and how did you choose them?
I was actually the author of our first generation questionnaire
Yeah.
and matching algorithm. And that was based on my experience as a interpersonal focused consultant. Some are rather obvious about person, but we tested, I talked to different people. And then my experience at Stanford in the interpersonal dynamics program that also informed me to some of the more psychological areas. What happens now is potentially excuse me, potentially more sophisticated than what we did then. What we did then was some more simple matching. That was the first generation, just
Mhm.
like with like, or certain characteristics that might, if not an exact match, there'd be an attraction or Venn diagram kind of overlap with the other person. Now you can get a lot more sophisticated with different kinds of scoring and predictive index and so forth.
How many
Initially, we
companies
did.
were there in the very first one?
I can't say accurately. I don't want to say something that's wrong. I do actually remember writing that, and maybe it was 30 different
Yeah. Great.
factors, something of
Yeah.
that nature.
Yeah.
But I want to research it to get the exact number.
Gotcha. It'd be nice to capture that, actually. It'd be nice to get those original questions, just as because one of the things that we do with Online Personal Watch is we try and be historical reference. So I'd love to
Right.
capture any material that you've got that we can put online. It would be amazing.
I'll work on it. I know we have
I think
some at the museum already. So
nice.
I had a number of other jobs initially, like, a jack of all trades founder,
Mhm.
like finding our first office with Gary,
Yeah.
which was in an area of San Francisco called South Park,
Yeah.
which at the time we had a rather derisive nickname for as Multimedia Gulch. And then hiring our first people. Peng Ong, the technical founder who did write initial code, he left early on. He didn't stay a long time. And we hired a very good CTO who I would also consider as a founding CTO, Sterling Hutto, who
Uh-huh.
unfortunately is no longer with us.
Mm.
That brings to mind another interesting thing, how as companies get started, who is a founder and who is not. And it kind of gets added onto over the years. And some people don't realize that we had this 1.5 or 2 year incubation starting in 93. And so some folks who were around when we went live in 95, you might consider them a founder. And then we have this interesting history where the company, it was sold in the late 90s, first to Ticketmaster and later to IAC. And IAC married it with some other brands, which is great. It's now an S&P 500 company, Match Group, and I believe Tinder actually has more usage now than Match as part of their different branding. It's like a General Motors of the industry. But sometimes I hear one of the founders of one of these 20 or 30 other brands calling themselves a founder of Match. So, which, it might be true, or they founded a company that later became part of Match.
Yeah. So who were the folks that came on board in 94 and 95 before the launch?
I don't remember the exact date that we brought Fran Meyer on.
Yeah.
It was probably before the launch, but I don't remember the exact date. And she also brought on another business school colleague of mine who I valued, John Neal.
Yeah.
And then there were a number of early engineers hired with Sterling Hutto, who were very good. Feed loader, Kevin Kunzelman, and then another early business guy, Chris Butt.
Yeah.
Those are some of the people I remember that are fun to memorialize.
Are you still in
But there
contact?
were other people. Go ahead.
Are you still in contact with many of them?
Yes. Yeah. It's kind of it's a special kind of community
Yeah.
by many startups are, it's a roller coaster experience. And then we had one that was public facing with the public publicity and the kind of electricity of dating and relationships. And many of the hires were either first job or close to first job.
Wow.
Very classic, eager startup
Yeah.
folks, a few of us with more experience. So it was definitely a learning crucible for many people.
So Fran did marketing, and what did Chris do? Chris Neal?
Chris Butts, he worked on marketing and different business aspects. So,
Chris
I didn't
Pratt.
know see day to day.
Okay.
John Neal was another
John
fellow
Neal.
I
Yeah.
mentioned who's no longer with us. He worked on Fran's team. I would consider him as a product manager.
I see. Okay.
And we tried to balance the team out. So someone like John Neal was very professional, well experienced.
Yeah.
And that would kind of balance out some other team members maybe who were not experienced and just very eager and
Yeah.
optimistic.
So you launch in 1995, you're coming out the gate, you've got your first 1,000 members. What were some of the assumptions that you had? What were some of the things that you thought would happen that didn't? And what was that initial kind of launch period like?
Well, the initial launch was, as I mentioned before, we rolled it out city by city for a
Yeah.
time until it kind of caught fire. And then because we were concerned about getting to a critical mass of users in each geographic area so they'd have a good experience. And that it was, you might say it was painstaking, but I'd say it was a success. It went fine, and possibly things were a little less pressured. They happened a little less fast then than people sometimes expect now. But within a year or two, there was a degree of worldwide knowledge of the brand, and then many more people started to come on. And you have challenges of the system, the coding. There's a point, like many startups, where there were some big issues about should we just rework this all from the beginning or just keep adding on to the coding. So we had some challenges of that sort. I think the biggest challenge was how to monetize. There was little experience at that time about subscriptions online or pay for service online. And that was harder than we expected. We were more optimistic that more people would sign up and pay a modest monthly fee. And we experienced the dynamics that you still see now, that companies develop intelligence about churn, people coming on and off, how to market, to give free trial or not, or for how long, or what someone can do without paying a subscription fee. So I think being an early mover, as people were learning about the internet and first swimming around on it, made it hard. It was, and even though we were famous, or very well known on the Today Show, et cetera, and people getting excited about meeting or even leading to marriage on Match.com, it was hard to develop significant revenue. So
what was the first membership? What did you charge? And when did it happen?
Again, I'd have to look it up. It was modest. I forget if it was $5.99, $4.99 a month, $9.99. I think we tried different things. We tried some different levels. I'd have to research it to get the exact number.
And do you think the problem was really the price and the proposition, or was it really that people didn't trust putting in their credit cards at that point?
I don't think it was the credit card trust issue, although, yeah, people weren't used to it as much and weren't buying online hardly at all at that point. I think it was what people's just kind of experimenting with the internet and getting a sense of what the value of it was. Plus, just like today, you can join for free and you can get some value out of that. And people getting used to the idea that you can pay for that and that it's valuable. If you seriously, in the case of Match, you seriously want to date people with the relationship orientation.
Yeah. So was there a tipping point, the point at which things were growing, bubbling along quite nicely, and then all of a sudden the rate of growth increased rapidly?
Yes. Again, I'm not sure exactly the timing. It would have been after the first year or somewhere in year 2 or 3. And that's when we had challenges, like a lot of startups. How do we make this work better at a larger scale? When you go from the first few 100,000 initial to 1 million, and then maybe there's 40 million people rapidly. And so I know we had a few choice points where we had to decide whether to rework the entire code. I think there was one point where we decided it was kind of like starting over on the technical part, and other times where you just fix it and make it work.
Yeah, that's a scary
But
time.
we got that.
When the wheels start falling off because of the growth. We're moving into a strange world now with AI. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think that should look like.
predicting the future is dangerous. It's clear AI can help with certain things, which it already is in some places. Like it can help a person with their messaging or review and help a person tune up their presentation of themselves. AI seems to be sharp enough even to do matching if you customize that, if you work
Mhm.
on that and you have ways to double check and catch errors. So I would expect to see more of that. There are other areas that don't feel as safe to me or I'm not sure about, like the idea of having some kind of AI driven avatar interact for you or introduce you to others or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, it takes something away from who you actually are. There should be something real about that. It's an interesting dynamic in that we founded it with very good, heartful vision to help people actually connect.
Mhm.
And so we have to be careful that we're serving that. There's a fabulous short story written by the British author E.M. Forster called The Machine Stops. It's
Mhm.
prescient. I think he wrote it in 1909, very early. And it's about a future society where people don't see each other face to face anymore, unless there's an emergency or some compelling need. And when they do, it's scary. They're not used to it. And
Wow.
the idea of the machine in the short story, it's the machine like the internet or AI web that kind of runs everything and controls all of our interaction. And
That
I
sounds
don't
like
like
essential
that
reading.
future. I don't like that future.
No, neither do I.
You go ahead.
No, neither do I. I think everybody in the room is like, "Oh my goodness." And it's unfortunately one wonders about what the future holds when it comes to, I don't know, I walk past in restaurants and I see couples sitting there, both looking at their phones. It's very, I find that almost traumatic. It's
Right.
like, how very sad. Yeah.
Well, we have to be careful that it doesn't creep there. So
Yeah,
like the
indeed.
idea of having the avatar speak for you, or the two avatars sort of have a pre-date
Right.
scenarios that I've discussed or heard.
There has been a startup that tried to do that actually. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
My AI will
Um,
talk to your AI and see if we want to date or not.
right. But on the other hand, I don't want to close it off. I mean, when the telephone came to be, people had similar concerns. I have
Yeah.
to be on this wire instead of visit somebody, and then the TV and so forth. And so they all had challenges, but we still have a lot of humanity and face to face, even with those technologies. So I think we can integrate it and use it well, and but should be aware of these
Yeah.
dangers.
Yeah. Simon, it's been great interviewing you. Simon Glinsky, you're the co-founder of Match. It's great to have you here today. This is the beginning of our journey. I hope to be able to perhaps get my mittens onto that business plan somehow, that we can run some items on OPW as historical
Sure.
reference. So thank you very much for
Sure.
your time today. It's been a great
Thank you.
pleasure.
This has been a very good conversation, and I appreciate your encouragement and everyone listening. And good luck with your relationships.
Good stuff. Thank you.